Who remembers where we left off? We were, it's been a busy week. Anyway, we were going through, I'm gonna close this. We've taken a moment, we got, Jesus went through his baptism, Jesus went through his temptation in the wilderness. That sets him out on his public ministry. But I paused it there to say, let's look at the people who were involved in the life of Jesus, because these are the people that he has to interact with, and wherever he's going or whatever he's saying, it's usually in reaction, good or bad, to these people that are in his life. So we went through the 12 apostles, the original 12. We went through what were called the disciples. Well, the apostles were called the disciples at the time. But then we had these other disciples, and who were they and what differentiated them from the apostles? And we had the 70 that were sent out, and those people had seen Jesus, learned from Jesus, worked the miracles of Jesus, had the resistance that Jesus had against him, and all of that. So they did all the things that Jesus and the apostles did. And then we had the women, and we talked about, I don't know if I have that piece of paper here with all the names on it, but Joanna, Susanna, Mary, and just all the Marys, and we didn't even cover them. But they were doing the work of Jesus, and they were involved in part of the miracle story, especially like the women who went to the tomb and saw the risen Jesus. So what are you gonna do? We can't hear it. Oh, anyway, so we had that, and then we also had Nicodemus, who Jesus had gone to at night, or he had come to Jesus at night. And Jesus explained the gospel to him, but he was a leader in one of the religious political groups. We had Joseph of Arimathea, who gave his tomb to Jesus to be buried in. So we had all of these people. And the handout I gave you today is those people or those groups. Oh, here, Dennis. I see Dennis looking like, I didn't get one. Can I help? Yeah. Anyway, so now we've got these groups, and most of them you've heard about before, but these were the religious leaders or the governmental leaders or just the people of influence who interacted with Jesus. And it's really funny because, if you ever watch a Jesus movie, these people might as well have horns on, that they're always the bad guy. And I was watching a clip of The Chosen, which I haven't watched any, but I see clips. But this clip, because I guess the Jesus guy was on The View recently. And, so they try to make Jesus out to be this social justice Jesus. So they played a clip of him where Jesus is arguing with I don't know if it was the Pharisees or whoever they were. They should wear team jerseys, Pharisees, Sadducees, Sanhedrin, so you know who they are. But I mean, and he's just giving them heck over the way that they interpret the law and the way that they treat the people and, this and that. And so the ladies on The View, and I don't want to take a stance on that, but the ladies on The View are saying, yeah, that's the Jesus we all love, is the one who stands up for, stands up for that. And, but they don't realize at the same time, he's really giving a hard time to the Jewish leaders. So anyway, the first one I've got on there are the Pharisees. And I've got here that the Pharisees were a plant were a prominent Jewish religious sect known for their strict adherence to the law and tradition. They believed in the resurrection of the dead, angels, and the existence of an afterlife. They often clashed with Jesus over matters of interpretation and legalism and hypocrisy. Of course, they would look and say, well, that's Jesus's view when they call us legalists or call us hypocrites or call us, whatever. But when you think about it, and I think I've said this before in the past, if you read about the Pharisees, even in scripture, I mean, other than the fact that they're always after Jesus for something, you read about the way that they adhere to their religion. This is the kind of guy you'd like to see show up at your doorstep to date your daughter. I mean, they're upright people. They're involved in their religion. Their religion says to do this, they do this. Religion says don't do this, they don't do it. So even in the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and the Pharisee's standing there and he's giving his confession, and he's saying, Lord, didn't I do, and I give a tenth of my mints, and were those like my certs? No, but anyway, and he's actually listing all the things that are in the law, whereas the tax collector comes up and he confesses pretty much, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but pretty much he's confessing, I don't follow the law. I don't do anything you say to do. But he says, have mercy on me. See, and that's a big difference between the people and a lot of these church leaders, is that the church leaders don't think that they have anything to ask forgiveness for, to throw themselves at the feet of Jesus. And so that's where they always get in trouble. Because I don't think that you'll ever see once where Jesus says, you hypocrites, or whatever he calls them, and they go, wait, you're right. No, I mean, you just never see that, in the accounts. And I think that's what always gets Jesus mad. Let me do Ray, then we'll do Joe. Do your microphone.
Just a question, all of these people are Jewish, and they just have a different interpretation of the Torah, and that's what the difference of interpretation was what divided them?
Could you imagine? I mean, if we had more than one denomination, I mean, we have thousands of them. That's exactly what, exactly what it is. So that these different groups, well, let me get into it when we get a little bit further. But the part about where it says that they believed in the resurrection of the dead, angels, and existence of the afterlife, the Sadducees, I think it is, they deny those three things, so they do it different. But it's no different than all the denominations that we have. Joe?
Yeah, I think that Nicodemus was an example of one of them coming forward and recognizing their error, but afraid to publicly admit it for what he might lose.
You're right. Yeah. And that's hard. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, how hard it was to go against the grain, especially if you're in that ruling class. If you're the run of the mill, nobody's going to notice if you change your mind or you go off and you go off to a couple of Hare Krishna meetings or something like that. Nobody's going to notice, but if pastor went and the press followed him, people would notice. So yeah, those who do, secretly follow Jesus do it for a reason. But you got to understand how difficult it is for people, especially if we go, let's see, Sinai happened when, 1800 years before, 1500 years before. Your families all your family trained generation after generation after generation, however many generations you go, this is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. You know? And if this is what you do and you do it and you don't kill the proper animal to atone for it, you know, the earth can open up and swallow you in, which there are examples of that happening, you know, in the scripture. So without even knowing, you just know, you know, you don't even have to study. You just kind of know this is the way a Jew acts. I'm sure, well, I didn't grow up Christian, but those of you who did, I'm sure that you knew there was a way that a Christian acts, even though you didn't know why, other than your pastor yelled about it in church. I mean, you know, however it was passed down, you just knew that you don't do that, you know, but you just know, but you didn't know it because you were thumbing through the Bible one day and go, wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. You know, it just, so it's the way it gets passed down to all these people. So any of these people, the Pharisees, you know, they clashed with Jesus over matters of religious interpretation and practices. And that's what, you know, Ray was bringing up, is that they're saying, no, you don't understand, Jesus. You got to do it this way, Ray.
Well, was it the Pharisees that kind of went overboard and wrote 613 laws to protect or, you know, kind of buffer the individual from sinning?
Well, I don't know that those were in the 613 laws. I think the 613 laws are in scripture. But what they did was that they came up, but you have to tell me if this is bad. Obviously, Jesus thought it probably was. So no. So what they did was they came up with things that kept you from getting close to sin. You know, so if drunkenness is a problem in the scripture, which it is, they and the Baptists would say, no drinking. Well, the Pharisees didn't say no drinking, but you know, but that's what people do, is they say, okay, to keep you from sinning, no alcohol. To keep you from working up your lust, you know, no dancing. I'm bringing up modern stuff now. No, you know, leave enough room for the Holy Spirit between you. And so all of these things. So then they come up with, well, what's a Sabbath walk? You know, you can only go so far on a Sabbath day before you're breaking Sabbath. So they come up with just different ways to put a hedge around. But it could be that they're concerned for their people because they know the seriousness of the infraction versus people that don't do anything. You know, so I don't know if they went over the 613 laws. They're all in the scripture. Half of them you can't do because there's no temple, no priesthood, no sacrificial system. Some of the laws are for women, some of the laws are for men. Some of the laws are at different occasions. You know, we know the top 10, right? I mean, we know those, but those other ones, you know, follow suit. So anyway, so the Pharisees were characterized by their legalistic approach to religion, and Jesus criticized them for the hypocrisy as they prioritize that outward appearance. And that's where there's a problem, is when people try to look holier than thou or try to act holier than thou just for the appearance sake. And people do that, you know, not any of us, but I've heard there's people out there that, out there that, you know, out there that, you know, that do that. So, and then they, like the other groups, plotted against Jesus. You know, every time something came up serious, it says in the scripture, and they plotted for a way to kill Jesus, you know, for one group or the other. Anyway, the Sadducees were another Jewish sect, primarily composed of priests and aristocrats. So these are the higher class people. You know, the Pharisees were just kind of your run-of-the-mill. They weren't poor, but they were just your run-of-the-mill religious people. Where the Sadducees were kind of like the upper crust. They were composed of priests and aristocrats. They held positions of power within the temple hierarchy and did not believe in the resurrection, angels, or the afterlife. They didn't believe really in anything spiritual. You know, and you see that with a lot of Jews today, probably the majority of them. They have nothing spiritual that happens. Is that your keeping of the law is because the law's there, and that's the way you communicate with God, is through that obedience. But there's nothing special that happens. You know, they have very low, I don't want to say low opinion, because that's not the right word, but they have a very low thought about heaven and hell. It's just not in their. I would say this: if you run into Jews that think about heaven and hell, it's because they live in America and they've been around Christians and they hear about it and they don't know that in their, you know, in the Old Testament, there's no heaven and hell. Where do the dead people go? In the ground. They go, and then they've got Sheol, and I stop and think if Sheol and Gehenna are not Gehenna. What's the other one? Sheol and Gehenna. Well, Gehenna's more of a hell. But I'm trying to think if those are just in the New Testament, that they talk about what in the New Testament, they talk about what the Jews believed. I have to check and see if it's in the Old Testament. I don't remember. You know, David says about when his infant son got, God struck him down because of that Bathsheba affair, like that, and he struck the product of that relationship down, and David says, I know that he can't come back to me, but I can go to him. And so then some people, Christians usually, will take that and say, well, see, the baby is saved and the baby is in heaven, and David knows he can go to heaven. I think what David's saying is, I'm going to meet him in the ground. I can go to where he goes. We don't know. My point is that these things that it says the Sadducees don't believe the resurrection, angels, and the afterlife is pretty common, in Jewish thought. Now, Christians trying to evaluate like today's Jews, they'll throw all this stuff in. Oh yeah, the Jews are waiting for the resurrection of the Jews. You talk to Jews, you've been to Israel. Those Jews, because they're making a buck off you. No, right? No. So they're gonna give you the kind of the Christianized way, of thinking about it. But it's not like that. Do your microphone.
They didn't make you feel very welcome when these guys using.
Oh,
Larry and I were walking back and felt very intimidated by having to be able to call a cab, and we was stormed out. But when we walked into that restaurant, everything stopped. It was stone silent.
yeah.
And very, very, very uncomfortable. And we thought our leader thought we'd get stoned for going out and walking.
I get like that when you walk into IHOP. What are you talking about?
Leader got all
Yeah.
going out on Saturday, walking.
Yeah.
Or doing the work.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying that's what these different groups, believe. But they disputed with, with Jesus also. So here's funny. You got the Sadducees on one side theologically, the Pharisees on the other side theologically. But the one thing they can agree on, Jesus is wrong. So then that was always the fun part about this whole Jesus interacting with all the groups in Jerusalem or in Israel, is that they fought like dogs against each other, but they could all come together on, we got to get rid of Jesus. That just, and people do that. People do that today. Like I say, we're just built on more, denominations than they were. So they had temple confrontations. The Sadducees were key figures within the temple establishment. And they were involved with the, with the confrontations. They plotted against Jesus, just like anybody else. And Jesus gave them big warnings, probably gave them at least as big a warnings as you always hear about with the Pharisees. Yeah. So that was the Pharisees, and that was the Sadducees. The scribes, I just gotta watch my time. The scribes, now see the scribes, it says in your notes, the scribes were experts in Jewish law and were responsible for interpreting and teaching it to the people. They were often associated with Pharisees and were present in various encounters and disputes with Jesus. Denny?
Curiosity, Moses first gave the law to the Israelites. And how did these legislators and like Jesus' time get so far off the track from the original Ten Commandments with the law and the Israel?
Well, you know what, on Ten Commandments, I don't know that they're off. I think it's probably the degree in which they want to enforce them. Ten Commandments are pretty clear, okay? What's our beef with the Ten Commandments right now is, do we follow the Ten Commandments because they're in the Old Testament? Or do we follow the Ten Commandments because Jesus spoke? Because what did Jesus say? Jesus says, you've heard it said. And when he says you have heard it said, he's saying, the law, okay? But then what does he say after that? But I say. And then he goes on and he gives his interpretation of law. So he says, if you hate your brother, what?
You've committed murder.
You've committed murder. That commandment about murder? Well, now all of a sudden he said, it's not just if you're physically killing someone, but if you hate your brother, it's like you're murdering him. You're ruining his reputation, and you're not showing love, the love God, love neighbor, and all that. So then he says, you have heard it said that thou shalt not commit adultery. I can't even say it. I'm so holy, I can't even say it. He says, I want to give these to. So he says, thou shalt not commit adultery. You've heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say, what is this?
You got a love in your thoughts.
Lust in your heart.
You
committed adultery. But even Jesus has, I don't know if it's a private interpretation, because he's the one who gave it on Mount Sinai too. But I'm just saying, for what the point that he's trying to get, he does it. Now, where the people get off, like from Moses's time to later times, it's more in the ceremonial laws and how you practice that. And that's, pardon? Do your microphone.
There's a different relation from like today, that we each have different liturgy or how we.
That's exactly true.
With the Ten Commandments, why, look at how we have to explain or have another law when something, and even like directions on, you get an iron and it says caution, don't iron the clothes while they're on your body. I mean, it's like.
Yeah. Somebody always wants to expand it, because I better expand it because I don't think you really understand it.
Yeah.
If you understood it the way that I did, you would do it my way. I'm not joking. No. No, but yeah, and so like on the ceremonial laws, what does it mean? Jesus hang on, I gotta remember this, Mark 7. I think it's the end of Mark 6, going into 7. But the Pharisees say, or one of these groups, I forget which group, doesn't matter, but says, why do your disciples not wash their hands before they eat? Yeah, and he wasn't talking about, hey, you've been out playing in the dirt all day, wash your hands. It was a ceremonial washing that they had to do. And it makes sense. If we have to do it, why don't your disciples have to do it? And then Jesus answers them, and I forget the whole answer, but it was against what they thought. You can always say that part. But he ends it by saying that nothing that enters your body defiles you. Because what goes into your mouth, eat, drink, dirty hands, clean hands, this goes out in the toilet. It says, but what does defile you is what comes out of your heart. See, and so this is the difference in these groups, is how they've interpreted what the laws mean. Now, by the time it got down to the people of Jesus's day, it was probably what I was saying earlier. We know what we do as church people or as Christians. We just don't quite know why we do it, but it's always been done. So to them, the hand washing was just always done. But they had no idea of why it was done and, for where it lined up and things. So let's see, we're on the scribes. So the scribes are like, oh, right.
From what I can see is that for about 15 to 1800 years, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the rule of the land.
Well,
And Jesus comes along and he said, "You've been advanced." And, people want to join him, but then these other guys are saying, wait a minute, this goes against everything. And, you go against me and now you're out of the temple.
yeah. Yeah, the only thing is that these people didn't rule that long. These people, see, this is the difference between Judaism of the Second Temple era at Jesus's time and Jews today versus the Hebrews, the ones who came out of slavery. They had no Pharisees, Sadducees, they had temple, they had priesthood, they had the law, they had the sacrifices. They didn't have any of that. So when the temple was destroyed the first time in 586 BC, y'all remember that, right? No, when the Babylonians came in, Nebuchadnezzar, took them off into Babylon, Daniel, and his three friends. Anyway, and they destroyed the temple. They destroyed the walls of the city. They destroyed the temple. And after that point, there was no temple. There was no priesthood. There was no animal sacrifices. So now when the Jews returned, okay, let me give you my opinion. You can take it or leave it. Is that when they returned, there was no God. There was no temple, because God always presented himself in the tabernacle or the temple. You check it out. When they made the tabernacle in Exodus, and it's all, I don't know, probably a dozen chapters, and making all the fine stuff and the tentage and decorations and all. When God entered the temple, it was filled with smoke. I mean, just filled the whole place with smoke, and the Ark of the Covenant was there. Okay, and then when they built Solomon's temple, okay, to replace the tabernacle, is that you see the whole temple fills up with smoke again, and you've got the Ark of the Covenant. And all of that is the presence of God. When not Nebuchadnezzar, he's the bad guy, Nehemiah and Ezra come back from the captivity, they want to reinstitute the city and the temple. They want to rebuild the walls. Nehemiah's doing all the building, and Ezra's trying to put together a remnant of a priesthood to do all the stuff. When they got taken out of the temple back in 586 and taken off into Babylon, Ezekiel, who was in captivity already probably 10 years, He was in the first wave. Daniel was like in the third wave. Is that he, Ezekiel says in Ezekiel 10, I'm trying to talk and remember at the same time, doesn't always work. In Ezekiel 10, he says that he saw God leave the temple. That's pretty big to do. He saw God leave the temple. And then what I'm saying is later on, I don't think we see God re-enter the temple. When Nehemiah did a poor job of rebuilding the temple because he didn't have much to work with. It says that the old people who remembered the previous temple wept for days over what was this replacement. And we see no smoke. The Ark of the Covenant has never come back until Indiana Jones found it, right? You know, that comes in the Bible. No. Anyway, the Ark of the Covenant's never been around since it left, since Nebuchadnezzar's group took it in 586 BC. And so they had nothing. Here's my point. You get later on, remember, you got that 400 years of silence, no prophetic word. The prophets were gone at that time. Prophets were done by the time Nehemiah came around. You got 400 years of no prophetic voice until we hear about John the Baptist. Okay, and we did that a long time ago when we started this Life of Christ thing. And so at that point, Jesus comes on the scene. Again, this is me, take it or leave it. Jesus gets taken into the temple in Luke 2 as a baby. To me, that's when God re-entered the temple, that there was no God presence in those 400 years. And then when Jesus left the temple in Matthew 24, when he said, in this generation, and he gives all these woes and all that stuff, to me, that was God leaving the temple again. So the Jews, to me, since 586 BC even till today, had God in the temple for 3 years. Those 3 years. So anyway, while they've got nothing, they started up a whole new system. They started up the synagogues, so they would have places to meet. They couldn't meet in a temple. They had to have leaders, so they had a rabbinic system. All the stuff you ever hear about, like the Talmud or the Mishnah or any of that, whether you've heard of it or not, it's there. It's all there. I want to say current day, but current day to then, of their interpretations of what they thought the law meant. Okay, and so they have a whole different setup of the way that they do things. And that's where the Pharisees came from, the Sadducees, the scribes, whoever they had. Now hang on a second. Now the question is, what do we do with Herod's temple? Now they had a priesthood, they had sacrifices, but they have no Ark of the Covenant. We see nothing that talks about how it was established. And who was Herod? Was he a Jew?
Yeah.
No, he was part Jew. He was a Hashmonite or whatever they called them. Yeah. So he wasn't even really a Jew. He was friendly to the Jews, and his family came up with the Jews. And but I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know. I haven't worked this out yet, what to do with that second temple that was, there during, Jesus's day. But my point there, I gave you all that other stuff, but my point was to bring up about how we got all these other groups. They weren't around from the Moses time. Moses said, Aaron, you're the chief priest, and your sons will be the next chief priests. And the priests were,
Where did the Sanhedrin come from? Were they appointed people?
So the Sanhedrin were they the next ones on the list? I don't have the page. Let me see. Oh, so we did, huh? mine's different, hang on. Oh, the Sanhedrin, well, they were like a court. You know, they were like a judicial court. Those last three on there that are on there, the Essenes, the Sanhedrin, and the Samaritans and the Zealots, you know, they were kind of extraneous groups. They were groups of people, like the Zealots were people that hated the Jewish rulers and wanted to overthrow the government. Okay? Okay, so they weren't like an official group. What was it, the Samaritans, you know about the Samaritans are like kind of the half-breeds, you know, they're kind of half Jewish, half something. I forget what the other half is. Well, they weren't pagans, they were just Jews that weren't very Jewish, you know? But anyway, they were an outside group. People wouldn't do stuff with the Samaritans except for Jesus would do stuff with the Samaritans. The Samaritan woman, we'll talk about her in a couple of weeks. The woman at the well, the Samaritan, when he says, who's your neighbor? When the Pharisees say to Jesus, when he says to love your neighbor, and they go, who's my neighbor? And then he tells the story about the Good Samaritan, just to make him mad, because they didn't associate with the Samaritans. So what he's telling them is your neighbor's the Samaritans.
Were the Samaritans an offshoot of Lot and that group?
Yeah, you know, it's going way, I mean, I don't know that you could,
Because they were mixed marriage.
no, well, the mixed marriage is all, I mean, there was, you know, the thing about Nehemiah's temple, you know, Nehemiah was pretty brutal, or Ezra, one of the two, I forget what, you know, they get back to rebuilding that temple in Jerusalem. This is what, around 510 BC, after they've been the 70 years in captivity. And then someone comes up and says, what are you gonna do with all these people that came back from Babylon? They all intermarried. What was the answer?
But
Huh?
separate them.
Well, yeah, they have to get a divorce. You have to separate. We're not having those people. You know, that's my paraphrase, but I mean, but that's basically, you know, that's basically what it was in trying to bring back the religion of Moses, or you know, of Moses' time, to bring that temple stuff back to the way it was supposed to be. And no matter how man tries to do that, it doesn't work. The only one that can bring everything back to the way it's supposed to be is Jesus. And that's what the promise is. You know, that's what the promise is in, well, all the prophetic nature, but in the book of Revelation, when it talks about the new heaven and the new earth, and it talks about that new garden and the water coming out, you know, flowing through it, is to bring everything back to the way that it was supposed to be. But when man gets involved, we end up with this. When man gets involved, hey, look, when man gets involved in the Lutheran church, how many different Lutherans are there? You know, we're just talking about one German denomination, you know? I mean, there's all kinds that, you know, that do it. And they split for the dumbest reasons. You know, I mean, you could stop and think, why did we split? Why did we split with them? Why did they split with?
Read him, I don't want to build it.
Yeah. So that just goes to show. So anyway, so that's where all these groups are coming from. So you got the chief priests, you know, I mean, you don't have a chief priest in Aaron's temple. You know, you have Aaron, who's the priest, who's the high priest. And then you got other priests, but you don't have a group called the chief priests. So these chief priests, yeah.
And I see also is the fact that you were born into a denomination like the Pharisee. But if you did not be a Pharisee, you could quit and say, well, I'm gonna go and join the Sadducees, right?
I don't know. I don't know how that works. You know, think of these groups as semi-political too. You know, because remember, it was a theocracy, you know, it was supposed to be a land run by God. But people say, sit down for a while, God, while I help you out here and get it all messed up. But think of them on that political side also, trying to rule, trying to keep order, Joe.
Yeah, to answer your question, there are 40 different Lutheran denominations.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing. How does that happen? You know, where's our, you know, we've got the Bible. Where's the Book of Concord? That's the problem. We've lost our Book of Concord. That's why we can't stay together. You know, and so people divide, you know, over that, you know, and what is the, like, I say specifically for Lutherans, because what is the Book of Concord? Because, you know, the Scandinavian churches never had the formula of Concord in the Book of Concord. And the formula of Concord is pretty strong, you know, pretty strong stuff, you know, like that. So again, it just divides. And, you know, I'm sure God looks down, kind of snickers at us, you know, and says, you know, they just don't get it. One day, you know, we'll all get it. So,
One word, I think, pride.
pride's a big
Yeah,
thing, yeah.
That they felt they were more right or whatever. God laughs at me all the time because I'm trying to tell him my plan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, so I know you got all these groups, these Herodians, well, you got elders, you know, elders, just respected leaders, you know, maybe they were the most quiet of the groups, you know, like, we've seen this before, you know. But the Herodians, now see, the Herodians, they were a political group that surrounded the family of all the Herods. You know, I forget how many Herods there was, but there was several of them that were kind of kings over, you know, Israel. You know, but the religious political party, think of it as, I don't want to get political here, but no, but think about what they call, you know, Christian nationalists today and the MAGA and stuff like that. And that all of a sudden these supposed Christians are surrounding, you know, the white, I mean, you know, our governments and want that part of government to stay the same. Or you can pick any group that's, you know, come up over the last couple of 100 years in America that think that their job is to protect Americanism more than it is to protect the faith itself. And that's what these people were. So these people were totally dedicated to the family of the Herods, good or bad. Yeah, so let's see, who else do we got? Who?
Getting back to the Sanhedrin now. And they were sort of judicial legislature. Now you could have somebody that's a Pharisee and also a Sadducee serving on as a part of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, in the Sanhedrin, yeah. Yeah, because it was more of a, you know, like a political judicial, you know, group. They used to, there's a couple of instances where they used to stand up and argue, you know, what are we gonna do about, you know, what are we gonna do about this Jesus? And, you know, someone, you know, one of them said, well, you know, and they're kind of pushing probably at the Sadducees for not believing the resurrection, you know, if so-and-so in the past didn't rise from the dead, why do we have to do, you know, that, or we shouldn't pay attention to this Jesus for this reason or that? And but you can see when you're reading it that they're poking at the other side. So yeah, they're just made up of all the different, you know, all the different people.
And there were 70 of them.
Yeah,
40.
Oh, you mean say
the Sanhedrin.
70 seats.
Yeah, and 70, you know, 70 is a number because it's a multiple of 7, you know, which is a God number, you know, like that. So, and then you got the Essenes. The Essenes were a Jewish sect living in isolated communities such as the Qumran. That's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. They practiced strict religious observances and were known for their communal living, aesthetic lifestyle, and focus on ritual purity. While not directly involved in political affairs, their withdrawal from the mainstream of society can be seen as a form of protest against the prevailing religious and political establishment. This would be much like the Amish and the Mennonites, you know, who just say, none of these people can get it right. God bless them, let them go do what they're doing. We're not participating, you know, and we go out into the, you know, and go off and do our, you know, do our thing. So. Yeah. Anyway, so, okay, so here's the point, is that these are the people that Jesus had to interact with. You had groups that differed with each other. You had groups that used to fight with each other. Groups that had different interpretations of things. But they just knew that Jesus was rocking the boat. And that's what people don't like. Nobody likes someone to come in and rock the boat. You know, I mean, if, I can't even think of an example where you think of something happening in town here and all the churches gather together. We're going to have a meeting. We can't have this going on in our town. And it would be something, excuse me, it would be something like that. So wherever Jesus goes, you know, because there's always somebody following him. You know, we'll see this as we, you know, watch his public ministry, as he goes somewhere and there's someone there. Well, there's one of these groups that's either questioning him or goes back and tells the others, you won't believe what Jesus just said up in Galilee, you know, or something like that. And we face the same kinds of things today. You gonna say something, Dennis?
I thought we might have a little uprising with the drag queens here a couple of years ago, but it faded away because it's a big attendance.
Yeah,
Old soul architect.
yeah. No, and that's what, well, you know, in fact, that would be a good, that'd be a good example, because that is something local, you know, here, and it is something, you know, current, is that, of course, then again, I guess nobody cared enough here, so. You know, but say if it was something that I can't even think, you know, we are so bombarded with news and cultural events, and I mean, just all the garbage that goes on, that after a while you get immune to it, and that, you know, you can't even work up a fiery response to it. Whereas back in the day, I don't know when the day was, you know, that towns would get upset about stuff like that. Yeah.
You could have shown with a map. There's a map of the police department that lists.
Do a little louder in your microphone.
Pin map.
Yeah.
It's a pin, name all the sex molesters, child molesters living in the city limits.
Mhm.
That would scare the devil out of you.
Yeah.
You'd think it was a burglary pin, because it's all the no, extremely high.
Yeah.
No idea. I mean,
You can find those online. Yeah.
wow. Scary.
Yeah.
So what thought can lead to the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Just disinterest or everybody joining Jesus?
The destruction of Jerusalem. That would have a tendency to do that. It took away their center of life. You know, we talked about this a little bit in the Master's Men, when we were talking about, you know, in chapter 6, about the 4 horsemen and the destruction that they did. And then I read some pieces out of Josephus talking about what was happening during the destruction of Jerusalem, and how barbaric the Romans were, and then how barbaric the Jews were against Jews, because they didn't trust each other within their walls at night, you know, and stuff like that, of just the way that happens. But they all had a center of where they were, and with the destruction of the temple, they've got nowhere to gather, and they all got kicked out of by 135 AD, all the Jews were gone from Jerusalem, you know, all of them. So 70 was the destruction, most of them were gone, all the institutions were gone, and just nothing. So. I don't know what you would compare it to, you know, to today. I can't,
Europe,
pardon?
Europe, church is nothing in Europe.
Well, no, I know, I realize, I mean, I know that the church is nothing, but the church could be. Okay, the church could be, it wasn't like the church was driven out, it was like the church gave up. You know, they gave up. You know, like after World War II, most Jews gave up. You know, they just couldn't imagine that God was so bad to allow that they gave up. If anybody here knows about Francis Schaeffer, you know about Francis Schaeffer and his L'Abri, he was a missionary and he went to Europe in the late 50s, early 60s. He was trying to build Europe back up Christianly because of what happened in World War II, and that the churches just fell apart. People, like I say, people gave up just because of the harshness of the war. Surely there couldn't be a God. I remember when I lived in, I lived from 1960 to 62, I lived in Toulouse, France. My dad was over there working. And I remember in our neighborhood, there was a couple of people that he worked with that bought houses there. So you got English speaking people, but a missionary moved in also. And I always thought, now I was a Jew, so I didn't know any different, but I always thought that was strange, you know, because to me, Europe was Christian because no matter where you went, you saw all these giant cathedrals. Okay, but he was a missionary there trying to win people back to, you know, to win people back to Christ. So this Christianity stuff isn't for sissies. You know?
You saw that in Europe when we were traveling around and going to different cathedrals that the tour guide would say, you know, this was, you know, a Christian establishment, but then they exited and hear from the Muslims and Muslims took it over for a couple of years. They searched and pushed it around, added room or whatever, and then they moved out and somebody else moved in. So it continued.
If you ever look into any surveys on the number of churches that have closed down in America in the last 40 years, the number is enormous. You can probably buy Starbucks coffee in them now.
Yeah, or beer, used to bring beer barn,
Yeah,
the cathedral turned into a beer.
Just to bring that number I gave you earlier, there are 40 current active Lutheran denominations. There are 45 that no longer exist.
yeah. Yeah, you know, Larry, were you gonna say something else? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just heard this the other day, it kind of sidelined to this, but, I was listening to the radio when I was talking to my son. And, he says, what are you laughing at, Dad? And I go, well, I just heard something on the radio. They did a survey in California of a number of the universities. And they asked the question of the students, what sex do you are? What sex are you? 40% said they didn't know.
Yeah, I know. See, well, you know, and this goes back to, see, we're just bombarded by this all the time. Is that we chuckle. But listen, we chuckle about it just because we're just on overload for all this stuff. But I'll bet in the mid-19th century, I'm just picking a date, I'll bet in the mid-19th century that would come up. And this class in the mid-19th century would say, what are we going to do about it? We're not leaving this room until we figure out what we're going to do about it. You know, we're going to petition the university. We're going to do this. We're going to, you know, like that. And trust me, I'm not putting anybody in guilt trips because I'm walking out of here when the time's up too, you know. But that's because we're just so bombarded. Whereas in earlier times when there was not this kind of communications, this news was shocking. Because where did you hear that? I mean, oh, the stagecoach came through and the guy was telling you that that's what he saw, you know. No, I'm just saying, you know, and people are outraged by, and today we're, and what's gonna happen is it won't be too much longer that we'll be Europe. We'll have a small core of believers, but they'll be the true believers. And they're the ones who are going to keep the faith alive until people wise up, till the Holy Spirit goes back to work or something. And the growth will take place in Asia and Africa and in the rest of the Southern Hemisphere. And
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? So, but anyway, but that all goes back to what happened to those people. They all got scattered. And, you know, if they started back up, they started up more locally to where they were in their own little synagogue, systems, So wherever my grandfather went to synagogue in Russia before he left in the Bolshevik Revolution, is maybe that synagogue was started 600 years before by a community that was started 600 years before that. We just don't know.
Well, also the fact that people got comfortable in the position that they were put into in captivity. That, after 70 years, hey, why move?
Well, no, that was the other part in the Babylonian captivity. Only about 10% of the people came back out of captivity. The rest of the Jews stayed in Babylon. They'd married, they had jobs, because that's what they were told. We're getting late. Let's stay another hour. No, but that's what they were told to do. Huh? Yeah. But that's what they were told to do. They were told to marry, to work, and live a good life in Babylon. And then when Jeremiah's 70 years would be up, then you would go back, and they were comfortable. And up until the Ayatollah, there was a tremendous Jewish population in Iran and Iraq. I mean, big Jewish populations still from then. Then when the Ayatollah came in, out of here. So, okay. Any questions? I shouldn't say any questions? Howard, you okay there? Linda there with you? Okay. Yeah, he's muted. That's okay. That's okay. We're gonna go. Let me turn off the thing here, and then we're gonna say the Lord's Prayer, okay? If I can read this.